If marriage is a contract, I miss the asterisk about the fine print. My name is Rick Mason, and I've spent the last 12 years thinking I understood the terms of my agreement with Valerie. Turns out, I was reading the wrong document entirely. The coffee maker gurgled to life at 6:15 a.m., same as every weekday morning. Valerie emerged from our bedroom looking boardroom polished, not overtime weary, like someone who'd supposedly worked until midnight 3 nights running. Her makeup was flawless, her hair styled with the kind of precision that takes planning, not the thrown-together look of someone rushing to catch up on neglected projects. "Working late again tonight," she announced, not asked. She poured coffee into her travel mug, the expensive steel one I'd bought her for Christmas, and avoided my eyes. I studied her over my own mug, noting details I'd been too trusting to catalog before. The perfume was stronger than usual. Her blouse was new, still had the subtle crease marks from packaging. Most telling of all, she'd chosen her favorite earrings, the diamond studs she only wore for special occasions. "Big presentation coming up?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. "Bradford wants the quarterly reports restructured. You know how demanding he can be." Bradford Shearing, her boss, 48 years old, married, drives a BMW that costs more than most people's annual salary. I'd met him exactly once, at the company holiday party 2 years ago. He'd shaken my hand with the kind of grip that was trying too hard to prove something, and his eyes had lingered on Valerie just a beat longer than professional courtesy required. "Right," I said. "Bradford." Valerie finally looked at me, and for a moment, something flickered across her face. Guilt, maybe, or calculation. "I might be really late. Don't wait up." She kissed my cheek, a quick, perfunctory gesture, and headed for the garage. I listened to her car reverse down our driveway, then sat in the sudden quiet of our kitchen, processing the uncomfortable weight settling in my chest. I'm a project manager at Midwest Logistics, which means I coordinate shipments, manage schedules, and solve problems for a living. The skill set translates surprisingly well to other areas of life, including recognizing when patterns don't add up. Valerie's pattern had been shifting for months, and I'd been willfully blind to what the data was telling me. 3 late nights this week, 2 emergency meetings over the weekend, a credit card statement showing lunch charges at restaurants across town when she'd claimed to be eating at her desk, the wine I'd bought for our anniversary, her favorite vintage, sitting untouched in our refrigerator while she claimed to be too stressed to relax. I called Pete, my best friend and the owner of Murphy's Tavern downtown. He answered on the second ring, sounding like he'd been awake for hours despite the early time. "Rick, what's eating you?" "How do you know something's eating me?" "Because you never call before 8 unless there's a problem. What's going on?" I explained about Valerie's recent behavior, the inconsistencies, the growing distance between us. Pete listened without interrupting, which was one of his better qualities as a friend and a bartender. "You think she's cheating?" he said when I finished. The word hung in the air like smoke. I hadn't said it out loud yet, hadn't even fully formed the thought in my own mind, but hearing Pete voice it made everything click into place. "Yeah," I said. "I think she is." "What are you going to do about it?" Good question. The old Rick, the trusting husband who bought anniversary wine and expensive travel mugs, would have confronted her directly, would have asked for an explanation and believed whatever story she spun. But something had shifted in me during that kitchen conversation, watching her perform the role of overwhelmed employee while dressed for seduction. "I'm going to find out for sure," I said. After hanging up with Pete, I did something I'd never done in 12 years of marriage. I called Valerie's office. The receptionist, a cheerful woman named Linda, answered on the 3rd ring. "Packaging Solutions. How may I help you?" "Hi, Linda. This is Rick Mason, Valerie's husband. I was hoping to surprise her with lunch today. Is she in meetings all afternoon, or would she have some free time?" "Oh, how sweet. Let me check her calendar." I heard keyboard clicking. "Actually, she's got a pretty light day today. Just at 2 o'clock with Mr. Shearing, but that should wrap up by 3. Want me to let her know you're coming?" "No, that's okay. I want it to be a surprise." I hung up and stared at my phone. A light day. 1 meeting. Not the crisis-level workload she'd been describing for weeks. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. The rest of my workday passed in a haze of routine tasks while my mind churned through possibilities. Maybe there was an innocent explanation. Maybe she was planning something for my birthday next month, and the secrecy was for a good reason. Maybe I was being paranoid and jealous over nothing, but maybe I wasn't. At 5:30, I stopped at the wine shop near Valerie's office building and bought a bottle of the same vintage sitting untouched in our refrigerator. If she was really working late, she might appreciate the gesture. If she wasn't, well, I'd find out soon enough. The Packaging Solutions building was a gleaming glass tower in the business district, all sharp angles and reflective surfaces designed to project success and efficiency. I'd been there exactly twice before, once for that holiday party, and once to pick Valerie up when her car was in the shop. The lobby was mostly empty at this hour, just a security guard reading a newspaper behind the front desk. I recognized him from my previous visits, a large man everyone called Big Mike, former police officer who'd taken the corporate security job after retirement. He looked up as I approached, his face brightening with recognition. "Rick, here to see the missus?" Thought I'd surprise her. She's been working so hard lately. Something flickered across Big Mike's expression, too quick for me to interpret. "She's up on 15. You know the way?" I nodded and headed for the elevators, the wine bottle heavy in my hand. The ride to the 15th floor felt endless, my reflection multiplied in the polished steel doors, each version looking more uncertain than the last. Valerie's office was at the end of the hall, corner suite with windows overlooking the city. The door was closed, but I could see light underneath. I raised my hand to knock, then hesitated. Through the frosted glass panel beside the door, I could make out shapes moving inside. 2 shapes. I stepped closer, my heart hammering against my ribs. The glass was designed for privacy, but from the right angle, you could distinguish basic forms and movements. What I saw made my stomach drop like a stone. Valerie was sitting on her desk, her legs wrapped around someone standing between them. Bradford Shearing, his expensive suit jacket draped over a chair, his hands tangled in her hair. They were kissing with the kind of desperate intensity that spoke of long-suppressed desire finally unleashed. Scattered across the desk around them were the quarterly reports she'd claimed needed restructuring, the papers that were supposedly keeping her at the office until midnight, requiring weekend emergency meetings, demanding so much of her time and attention. I stood frozen in that hallway, watching my marriage dissolve through frosted glass while holding a bottle of wine I'd bought to surprise my wife. The scene felt surreal, like something happening to someone else, until Bradford's hand moved to the buttons of Valerie's blouse and reality crashed back into focus. I turned and walked away. The elevator ride down felt different than the ride up, longer, quieter, like descending into some deeper version of myself I hadn't known existed. By the time I reached the lobby, my hands had stopped shaking and my mind had started working again. "Everything okay?" Big Mike asked as I passed his desk. I stopped and looked at him, really looked. His expression was sympathetic, knowing, not surprised. "How long?" I asked. He glanced around the empty lobby, then met my eyes. "Couple months, maybe more." "I'm sorry, Rick. I thought about saying something, but it wasn't my place." I nodded. "Thanks for being honest. What are you going to do?" I hefted the wine bottle, feeling its weight. "I'm going to think about that." The drive home gave me plenty of time to think. By the time I pulled into our driveway, I'd made several decisions. First, I wasn't going to confront Valerie tonight, or tomorrow, or anytime soon. Confrontation was what the old Rick would have done, and the old Rick was the kind of man who got played for a fool. Second, I was going to document everything, every lie, every inconsistency, every piece of evidence I could gather. If this marriage was ending, and after what I'd witnessed, I couldn't see how it wouldn't, I wanted to control how it ended. Third, I was going to make sure Valerie and Bradford understood that actions have consequences. I spent the evening researching divorce lawyers online, while Valerie's dinner grew cold in the microwave. She finally came home at 11:15, looking appropriately disheveled for someone who'd supposedly spent 6 hours restructuring reports. "Sorry I'm so late," she said, not meeting my eyes. "Bradford had some last-minute changes he wanted implemented." "I'm sure he did." She looked at me sharply, but I kept my expression neutral. Are you okay? You seem different. Just tired. Long day. She nodded and headed upstairs. I heard the shower running, then the hairdryer, then the soft sounds of her getting ready for bed. When she finally came downstairs in her robe, I was still at my laptop. Coming to bed? In a few minutes, just finishing up some work. She hovered for a moment, like she wanted to say something else, then headed back upstairs. I listened to her footsteps on the ceiling above, waited for the house to settle into quiet, then got back to work. I started with our joint bank accounts, making note of every balance, every automatic payment, every shared asset. Then I moved on to credit cards, insurance policies, property records. By 3 a.m., I had a complete financial picture of our marriage and a plan for dismantling it. The next morning, Valerie emerged from the bedroom looking less polished than usual. Her makeup couldn't quite hide the shadows under her eyes, and her hair lacked its usual precision. Another late night tonight? I asked conversationally. Probably. This project is really demanding. I'm sure it is. She poured coffee with shaking hands, spilling a few drops on the counter. When she bent to clean them up, I noticed a small bruise on her neck, just below her collar line. A bruise that looked suspiciously like a bite mark. Have a good day, I said as she headed for the garage. You too. After she left, I made 3 phone calls. The first was to our bank, requesting new account access codes and temporary holds on our joint credit cards due to suspicious activity. The second was to a locksmith, scheduling an appointment for that afternoon. The third was to Pete. I need a favor, I told him. Name it. I need to borrow your cousin Danny, the one who works in IT. The hacker? The computer specialist? Pete chuckled. What are you planning, Rick? I looked out the kitchen window at the house I'd shared with Valerie for 8 years, the garden we'd planted together, the life we'd built on what I now understood was a foundation of lies. I'm planning to play for keeps. The locksmith arrived at 2:30, a weathered man named Carl who asked no questions about why I wanted every lock in the house changed. While he worked, I methodically went through Valerie's belongings, photographing anything that might be relevant later. Credit card statements hidden in her jewelry box. A second cell phone tucked behind books on her nightstand. Receipts for restaurants, hotels, and purchases I'd never heard about. The second phone was the real treasure. Password protected, but Valerie had always been predictable with her codes. Our anniversary date got me access to months of text messages between her and Bradford, each one more damning than the last. Can't wait to feel you inside me again, read one from 3 days ago. Rick suspects nothing. He's so pathetically trusting, read another from last week. When are you going to leave him? Bradford had asked 2 weeks ago. Soon. I need to figure out the finances first. He makes decent money, and I want my fair share. I screenshot everything, then put the phone back exactly where I'd found it. By the time Carl finished with the locks, I had enough evidence to bury them both. Pete's cousin Danny arrived at 4, a thin kid in his 20s with sharp eyes and nimble fingers. He worked in IT for a downtown firm but had a reputation for side projects that existed in legal gray areas. Pete says you need some computer help, he said, setting up his laptop at my kitchen table. I need security camera footage from an office building, specifically the 15th floor of Packaging Solutions downtown. Danny's eyebrows rose. That's not exactly legal. The security guard is a friend. He might be willing to help. Might be? I pulled out $500 cash. Will be. Danny grinned. Now we're talking. Big Mike was working the evening shift when we arrived at Packaging Solutions. The lobby was empty except for a cleaning crew working the lower floors. I introduced Danny as a friend helping with a personal matter, and Mike's expression grew sympathetic. I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday, Mike said. It's not right what's happening. That woman's been lying to you for months. Can you help us? Mike looked around the empty lobby, then nodded toward the security office. Come on, but we need to be quick. The security office was cramped and lined with monitors showing feeds from throughout the building. Mike pulled up the system for the 15th floor, his fingers dancing across the keyboard with surprising dexterity for such a large man. What dates do you need? Last 2 months? Any footage showing my wife's office or the hallway outside? Mike's expression darkened as he scrolled through files. There's a lot here, Rick. You sure you want to see all of it? I'm sure. What we found was worse than I'd imagined. Hours of footage showing Bradford entering Valerie's office after normal business hours. Long meetings with the door closed and the blinds drawn. Passionate embraces in the hallway when they thought no one was watching. On one particularly damning recording from 3 weeks ago, they'd been so careless that their activities were clearly visible through the office window. Danny copied everything onto encrypted drives while I watched my wife's betrayal play out in high definition. The timestamps told a story of escalating intimacy over months, beginning with lingering touches and meaningful looks, progressing to stolen kisses, and finally to full-blown affair conducted in her workplace with breathtaking arrogance. I'm sorry you had to see this, Mike said as Danny finished copying files. Don't be. This is exactly what I needed. We left the building with enough evidence to destroy both their careers and reputations, but I wasn't ready to play that card yet. First, I wanted them to understand they were in a game they couldn't win. I spent that evening preparing packages. The first contained printed screenshots of the most explicit text messages between Valerie and Bradford, along with a note. Thought you should know what your employees are doing on company time. I addressed it to the HR department at Packaging Solutions. The second package went to Bradford's home address, which I'd found through public records. It contained photos from the security footage showing him and Valerie in compromising positions, along with a simple message. Your wife might find these interesting. The third package was for Valerie's coworker Jenna, a gossipy woman who thrived on office drama and had never particularly liked my wife. This one contained copies of the text messages where Valerie had made disparaging comments about her colleagues, including several nasty remarks about Jenna herself. I mailed all 3 packages from different post offices across the city using untraceable prepaid postage. Then I went home and waited. Valerie came home at midnight, later than usual, looking flushed and satisfied. She kissed my cheek with lips that tasted like wine and lies. How was your day? She asked. Productive. Got a lot accomplished. She headed upstairs for her usual post-affair shower, while I pretended to watch television. When she came back down, wrapped in her robe with her hair still damp, she seemed more relaxed than she'd been in weeks. I think this project might wrap up soon, she said, curling up beside me on the couch. Really? Bradford thinks we're making good progress. A few more late nights should do it. I nodded and put my arm around her, marveling at how easily the lies came to her, how comfortable she'd become with deception. I'm glad, I said. I've missed having you home in the evenings. She looked up at me with what might have been genuine affection, if I hadn't known better. I've missed being here. We sat together watching a movie neither of us cared about, playing the roles of loving husband and wife, while both of us harbored secrets. The difference was, my secrets were about to explode her world apart. The first bomb went off at 9:15 the next morning. Valerie called from her office, her voice tight with panic. Rick, something terrible has happened at work. HR wants to see me immediately. What about? I don't know. They won't say. But there are rumors flying around the office about inappropriate relationships and company policy violations. I made appropriate concerned husband noises while internally celebrating. I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding. I hope so. I can't afford any problems right now, not with my performance review coming up. After she hung up, I called Pete to give him an update. Phase 1 is in motion, I reported. How do you think she'll react? Badly. Valerie doesn't handle stress well when she can't control the situation. And Bradford? He's about to have a very interesting conversation with his wife. The second bomb detonated around noon. Jenna, armed with screenshots of Valerie's disparaging text messages, had apparently been busy spreading gossip throughout the office. According to my source, Big Mike, who had friends throughout the building, Valerie was being shunned by her co-workers and facing serious questions from HR about her relationship with Bradford. The third bomb was the most satisfying. Bradford's wife, Patricia, had received the security footage photos and was reportedly on her way to the Packaging Solutions building for what promised to be a very public confrontation. I was having lunch at a deli across the street from Valerie's office when Patricia Shearing's silver Mercedes pulled up to the building's entrance. Even from a distance, I could see the fury in her posture as she strode through the lobby doors. She was a striking woman in her 40s, elegant and composed, but today she moved with the fierce purpose of someone who'd been pushed too far. 20 minutes later, she emerged with Bradford trailing behind her, his face pale and his expensive suit rumpled. They had what appeared to be a heated argument on the sidewalk before Patricia got back in her car and drove away, leaving Bradford standing alone outside his office building, looking like a man whose world had just collapsed. My phone rang as I watched Bradford stumble back into the building. "Rick?" Valerie's voice was barely above a whisper. "Can you come pick me up?" "What's wrong?" "Everything. Just... please come get me." I found her waiting in the lobby, clutching a cardboard box containing her personal belongings. Her face was blotchy from crying, her carefully styled hair disheveled, her professional composure completely shattered. "They suspended me," she said as soon as I approached. "Pending investigation into my relationship with Bradford. Someone sent HR photos and text messages, Rick. Private, personal things that should never have been shared." "That's terrible," I said, taking her box and guiding her toward the exit. "Who would do something like that?" "I don't know. But whoever it was, they're trying to destroy my career." We walked past the spot where Bradford had been humiliated by his wife less than an hour earlier. I wondered if Valerie knew about that confrontation yet, or if it would be another unpleasant surprise waiting for her. What did HR say exactly? That they received anonymous evidence of inappropriate conduct between Bradford and me. They showed me security footage, Rick. Someone had been watching us, recording us, violating our privacy. The irony was beautiful. She was more upset about being watched than about the betrayal that watching had revealed. "Maybe it's not as bad as it seems," I said, opening the car door for her. "It's worse. Bradford's wife showed up and caused a scene. She slapped me in front of half the office, called me names I won't repeat, and threatened to ruin my reputation if I ever come near her husband again." "She slapped you?" "Right across the face in the middle of the lobby. Security had to escort her out." I started the car, hiding my smile. "Are you hurt?" "My pride more than anything else." "But Rick, this could destroy my career. If word gets out about this investigation, no company in the city will hire me." "I'm sure it will blow over." She looked at me sharply. "How can you be so calm about this? Your wife has been accused of having an affair." "Have you been having an affair?" The question hung between us like a challenge. Valerie's eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, I thought she might confess everything. Instead, she looked away and said, "Of course not. Someone is trying to frame me." "Then you have nothing to worry about." We drove home in silence, Valerie staring out the window while I processed the success of my first strike. Her career was damaged, her reputation in tatters, her relationship with Bradford exposed and complicated by his wife's intervention. But this was just the beginning. When we pulled into our driveway, Valerie reached for her purse to get her house keys. I watched her face as she tried the front door and found it wouldn't open. "That's strange," she said, trying again. "My key isn't working." "Really? Let me try mine." I used one of the new keys Carl had given me, and the door opened smoothly. Valerie stared at the lock, then at me, confusion replacing the tears in her eyes. "When did you change the locks?" "Yesterday. We've been having some problems with the back door sticking, so I had a locksmith come out and service all of them. He said the front lock was worn and needed replacing." It was a plausible lie, and under normal circumstances, she might have accepted it. But these weren't normal circumstances. Valerie was already paranoid, already looking for threats and conspiracies. The timing of the lock change, coming right after her suspension, was too convenient to ignore. "You changed the locks yesterday," she repeated slowly. "That's right. The same day someone sent evidence of my affair to HR. Alleged affair." She stepped into our foyer and looked around like she was seeing the house for the first time. Everything was exactly as she'd left it that morning, but somehow the atmosphere had changed. The home she'd shared with her trusting husband had become the domain of someone else entirely. "Rick," she said carefully, "is there something you want to tell me?" I closed the door behind us and turned the new deadbolt. The sound seemed unusually loud in the quiet house. "Just that I love you," I said, "and I hope you know you can tell me anything." She searched my face for clues, but I kept my expression neutral. After 12 years of marriage, I'd learned to read her moods and tells. Now I was using that knowledge against her, presenting a calm facade while she struggled to understand how much I knew. "I need a drink," she said finally. "Good idea. Why don't you pour us both something while I put your things away?" I carried her box upstairs to our bedroom, taking my time, letting her stew in uncertainty. When I came back down, she was standing in the kitchen with a glass of wine, staring at her phone. "Bradford's been trying to reach me," she said. 17 missed calls. "Maybe you should talk to him. Find out what his plan is for dealing with this situation." "You want me to call him?" "If it helps clear up this misunderstanding, then yes." She dialed his number and put the phone on speaker. Bradford answered on the first ring, his voice strained and desperate. "Valerie, thank God, we need to talk." "I'm here with Rick," she said quickly. There was a pause. "Oh, hi Rick." "Hello, Bradford. I hear you're both dealing with some unpleasant accusations. Someone is trying to destroy us. The photos, the text messages, someone has been watching us for months." "Text messages?" I asked innocently. Valerie shot me a panicked look. "There were some communications between Bradford and me that were taken out of context." "What kind of communications?" Bradford's voice came through the speaker, tight with stress. "Personal conversations that made our professional relationship look inappropriate." "I see. And were they inappropriate?" Another pause. Longer this time. "Rick," Valerie said, "maybe we should discuss this privately. I think Bradford should be part of this conversation. After all, his reputation is at stake too." "Look," Bradford said, "I don't know who's behind this, but they're playing games with all of us. The timing, the anonymous packages, the security footage. Someone planned this whole thing." "You think it was planned?" "Absolutely. Someone wanted to expose our friendship in the most damaging way possible." "Your friendship," I repeated. "That's right." I looked at Valerie, who was gripping her wine glass so tightly her knuckles had turned white. She knew I didn't believe the friendship story. She knew I was testing them both, waiting to see how far they'd push their lies. "Well," I said finally, "I hope you figure out who's responsible." "We will," Bradford said. "And when we do, they're going to pay for what they've done to us." I smiled at that. "I'm sure they are." After Bradford hung up, Valerie and I sat in our kitchen, the silence stretching between us like a taut wire. She kept glancing at me, trying to read my expression, trying to figure out how much I knew and how much I was guessing. "Rick," she said finally, "I need you to know that whatever you might have heard today, whatever accusations are being made, I love you. Our marriage means everything to me." "I'm glad to hear that. Do you believe me?" I reached across the table and took her hand. Her skin was cold, her fingers trembling slightly. "I believe you love me," I said, "but I also believe you're not telling me the truth about Bradford." Her face crumpled. "Rick." "It's okay," I interrupted. "We don't have to talk about it tonight. You've had a traumatic day. Why don't you go upstairs and rest? Tomorrow, we can figure out how to handle this situation." She nodded, tears streaming down her face, and headed for the stairs. I listened to her footsteps overhead, heard the bedroom door close, heard the muffled sounds of crying. Then I opened my laptop and began planning phase 2. The next morning brought fresh chaos. Valerie's phone started ringing at 7 a.m. with calls from coworkers, friends, and her mother, who had somehow heard about the suspension. By 8, she was fielding questions about her relationship with Bradford from people who'd never shown interest in her personal life before. "The whole city knows," she said, pacing our kitchen in her robe. "Jenna has been telling everyone that I'm a husband-stealing manipulator who bad-mouthed the entire office staff." "That seems extreme." "She showed people text messages, Rick. Private conversations where I might have vented about work frustrations. Now everyone thinks I'm some kind of backstabbing witch." I poured coffee and pretended to read the morning news, while Valerie spiraled into panic. Her phone buzzed with another call, Bradford's number, and she declined it for the 5th time in an hour. "He keeps trying to reach me, but I don't know what to say. His wife filed for separation yesterday. She's demanding half his assets and threatening to expose everything if he doesn't cooperate. That's unfortunate." "Unfortunate?" Rick, this affects me too. If Patricia goes public with those photos, my reputation will be completely destroyed. I thought you said the photos were taken out of context. Valerie stopped pacing and stared at me. They were. Then what are you worried about? Because context doesn't matter when people want to believe the worst about you. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a number she didn't recognize. She answered cautiously. Hello? Is this Valerie Mason? The voice was female, professional, unfamiliar. Yes. This is Jennifer Walsh from Channel 7 News. We're doing a story about workplace harassment and inappropriate relationships in corporate environments. We'd like to get your comment on the allegations surrounding your employment at Packaging Solutions. Valerie's face went white. No comment, she said, hanging up quickly. The media? I asked. Someone tipped off the news. They want to interview me about the affair. Alleged affair. Stop saying that, she snapped. This isn't a game, Rick. My entire life is falling apart. Maybe you should call Bradford back. Coordinate your response. She looked at me suspiciously. Why are you being so helpful about this? Because you're my wife. If you're in trouble, we need to figure out how to handle it together. That seemed to calm her slightly. She sat down across from me and dialed Bradford's number. He answered immediately. Valerie, we need to meet. Things are getting worse. I know. Channel 7 just called me. They called me too, and the Tribune. Someone is feeding information to the media. What kind of information? Details about our relationship. Dates, times, locations. Whoever's doing this has been documenting everything. I kept my expression neutral while internally celebrating. The media attention was an unexpected bonus, but it made perfect sense. A story about corporate executives abusing their power for personal gain would generate plenty of interest, especially with photographic evidence. We need to get our stories straight, Bradford continued. If we're going to deny everything, we need to be consistent. Deny everything? Valerie asked. What choice do we have? If we admit to the affair, we're both finished. Your marriage is over, my divorce will cost me millions, and neither of us will ever work in this industry again. Valerie looked at me while Bradford spoke. I could see her weighing options, calculating risks, trying to determine which lies would cause the least damage. Rick is here, she said finally. Put me on speaker. She did, and Bradford's voice filled our kitchen. Rick, I want you to know that despite what people are saying, Valerie and I have never had an inappropriate relationship. We're colleagues and friends, nothing more. I appreciate you clarifying that, I said. Someone has been stalking us, taking photos out of context, manufacturing evidence to make our professional relationship look like something it isn't. That's a serious accusation. It's the only explanation that makes sense. The timing, the coordination, the media involvement, this is a calculated attack on both of us. Any idea who might be responsible? We're working on that. But in the meantime, we need to present a united front. Deny everything, question the authenticity of the evidence, and focus on the violation of privacy. Sounds like a solid strategy, I said. After Bradford hung up, Valerie studied my face carefully. You're being very understanding about this. What's the alternative? If someone is trying to frame you, then we need to fight back. And if someone isn't trying to frame me? The question hung between us like a challenge. She was testing me, trying to gauge how much I suspected, how much I'd accept. Then we'd have a different conversation, I said. She nodded and went upstairs to get dressed. I heard her on the phone with someone, probably a lawyer, discussing her options. While she was busy, I made a call of my own. Danny, it's Rick. I need another favor. What kind of favor? The kind that involves social media and public relations. An hour later, Danny arrived with his laptop and a mischievous grin. We set up in my home office while Valerie was still upstairs, and he showed me what he'd prepared. I created anonymous accounts on all the major platforms, he said. Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Reddit. Each one has a different persona, but they're all sharing the same content. He pulled up a Twitter account called Corporate Whistleblower with a generic avatar and no identifying information. The bio read, exposing corruption and abuse in the workplace. The beauty of social media is that once something goes viral, it takes on a life of its own, Danny explained. I post the evidence, other people share it, and suddenly everyone's talking about it. He showed me the first post. A side-by-side comparison of Valerie's public statements about working late and security camera timestamps showing her in Bradford's office during those same hours. The caption read, "When working late means something else entirely. Corporate corruption. Workplace affair. How many followers do you have? Started with 0 yesterday, up to 5,000 now. The story is getting picked up by local news accounts and gossip blogs. Perfect." Danny posted several more items over the next hour. Screenshots of text messages with identifying information redacted, photos from the security footage with faces blurred but bodies clearly recognizable, and a timeline of the affair that painted a picture of systematic deception and abuse of company resources. "The key is to let other people draw their own conclusions," Danny explained. "I'm not making accusations, I'm just presenting facts and letting the internet do what it does best." Which is? Destroy people who lie about their affairs. By noon, RAM packaging scandal was trending locally. The story had been picked up by 3 news outlets, 2 gossip blogs, and dozens of social media accounts. Valerie's name wasn't mentioned directly, but anyone who worked in the business community could easily identify the players involved. Valerie came downstairs looking haggard. She'd been on the phone all morning with lawyers, friends, and family members, trying to manage the crisis. "It's everywhere," she said, showing me her phone. "Someone posted our photos on Twitter. They blurred our faces, but everyone knows it's us." "Have you talked to Bradford?" "He's in full panic mode. His lawyer told him to expect a subpoena from his wife's divorce attorney. They want all his communications, financial records, everything. That's standard procedure in divorce cases." "Rick, there's something I need to tell you." Here it comes, I thought. The confession, the tears, the plea for forgiveness. "I haven't been completely honest with you about my relationship with Bradford." "Oh?" "We did develop feelings for each other, but we never acted on them. The photos make it look like more than it was, but I swear to you, we never crossed that line." It was a masterful lie, technically admitting to emotional infidelity while denying physical betrayal, giving me just enough truth to seem honest while hiding the worst of her behavior. "I see. Are you angry?" "I'm disappointed that you weren't honest with me from the beginning. I was afraid of how you'd react. I thought I could handle the situation on my own, end things with Bradford before they went too far." "And did you? End things?" "Yes. That's why someone is targeting us now. They wanted to expose our relationship before we could end it properly." Another lie. The security footage showed their relationship escalating, not ending. But I played along. "Who do you think is behind this?" "I don't know. Someone with access to our building, our communications, our personal information. Someone who's been watching us for months." "That's frightening." "It is. Rick, I'm scared. Whoever's doing this, they're not just trying to expose us, they're trying to destroy our lives." I pulled her into a hug, feeling her trembling against me. "We'll figure this out," I said. "We'll find out who's responsible." "Promise?" "I promise." That afternoon, while Valerie was meeting with her lawyer, I drove to Pete's bar to check on the next phase of my plan. Pete was behind the bar, polishing glasses and watching the news coverage of the scandal on the television mounted above the liquor bottles. "You're all over the local channels," he said as I sat down. "Indirectly. Channel 7 ran a whole segment about workplace harassment and corporate accountability. They didn't name names, but they showed the building where it happened and talked about anonymous evidence." "Good." Pete poured me a beer and leaned against the bar. "How's Valerie handling it?" "She's sticking to her story. Claims they never actually had a physical relationship." "Even after you showed her the evidence?" "I haven't shown her anything. As far as she knows, I'm the supportive husband who believes her version of events." "That must be difficult." "It's strategic. If she thinks I'm on her side, she'll keep confiding in me. The more she tells me, the more ammunition I have." "And Bradford?" "He's drowning. His wife filed for separation, his company is investigating him, and the media is circling like sharks." Pete nodded approvingly. "What's next?" Phase 3. Time to apply some direct pressure. I spent the rest of the afternoon preparing for the evening's activities. First, I called Bradford's office and left a message with his secretary, identifying myself as Valerie's husband and requesting a meeting to discuss the situation. Then I drove to his neighborhood, a wealthy suburb full of oversized houses and manicured lawns. Bradford lived in a colonial mansion with circular driveway and three-car garage. His BMW was parked outside, along with a moving truck. Through the front windows, I could see people carrying boxes and furniture. Patricia was apparently wasting no time in claiming her share of their assets. I parked across the street and waited. At 6:30, Bradford emerged from the house looking exhausted and defeated. He got in his car and drove away, probably heading to a hotel or temporary apartment. I followed at a distance. He stopped at a downtown hotel, one of the expensive chains that cater to business travelers. I watched him check in, then waited another hour before approaching the front desk. "Excuse me," I said to the clerk. "I'm supposed to meet Bradford Shearing for dinner. Can you ring his room?" "Certainly. What name should I give?" "Rick Mason." A few minutes later, Bradford appeared in the lobby looking confused and wary. He was dressed in the same suit he'd worn to the office, but it was wrinkled and his tie was askew. The confident executive I'd met at the holiday party 2 years ago had been replaced by a man who looked like he hadn't slept in days. "Rick, what are you doing here?" "I thought we should talk, man to man." He glanced around the lobby nervously. "This isn't a good time." "It's the perfect time. Your wife just moved out, your career is in ruins, and my wife is lying to both of us. I'd say we have plenty to discuss." Bradford led me to the hotel bar, a dimly lit space with leather chairs and soft jazz playing in the background. We sat in a corner booth where we couldn't be overheard. "Look," he said, "I know this situation is difficult for everyone involved." Difficult is an interesting word choice. What would you call it? A betrayal, a violation of trust, a calculated deception that's been going on for months. Bradford shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Rick, I want you to know that Valerie loves you. Whatever happened between us, it doesn't change how she feels about her marriage." "What exactly did happen between you?" "We developed feelings for each other. It was unprofessional and inappropriate, but it wasn't planned. These things sometimes happen in workplace environments. These things, emotional connections, attractions. We're both adults, we work closely together, we spend long hours on challenging projects. It's natural that we'd develop a bond." I leaned back in my chair and studied his face. He was still lying, still trying to minimize what had happened, still protecting himself and Valerie from the full consequences of their actions. "Bradford, I've seen the security footage." His face went pale. "What security footage?" "The footage that shows you and my wife having intercourse on her office desk, multiple times, over several months." He stared at me in shock, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "I've also read the text messages," I continued, "the ones where she calls me pathetically trusting, the ones where you discuss leaving our respective spouses, the ones where you plan your next encounter in graphic detail. How did you—" "Does it matter? The point is, I know everything. The question now is what we're going to do about it." Bradford reached for his drink with a shaking hand. "What do you want?" "I want you to understand that actions have consequences. You chose to pursue a relationship with my wife. She chose to betray our marriage. Now you're both going to live with the results." "Are you threatening me?" "I'm explaining reality. Your career is finished. Your marriage is over. Your reputation is destroyed. And this is just the beginning." "The beginning?" I smiled. "Did you really think a few anonymous packages and some social media posts were the extent of my plan?" Bradford's face went from pale to gray. "You're behind this. The photos, the media attention, everything." "I'm behind seeking the truth. You and Valerie are behind everything else." "What do you want from me?" "I want you to stay away from my wife. I want you to stop taking her calls. I want you to disappear from her life completely." "And if I don't?" "Then phase 4 of my plan goes into effect. And trust me, you don't want to see phase 4. I stood up and dropped a 20 on the table. "Enjoy your stay at the hotel, Bradford. Something tells me you're going to be here for a while." I left him sitting in that bar, staring into his drink and contemplating the ruins of his life. The drive home gave me time to savor the success of our conversation. Bradford now understood that I was the architect of his downfall, which meant he'd be desperate to distance himself from Valerie. That desperation would drive a wedge between them, isolating her and making her more dependent on me for support. When I got home, Valerie was in the kitchen making dinner. She looked up as I entered, her face brightening with what seemed like genuine relief. "How was your day?" she asked. Productive. I had an interesting conversation with Bradford. Her smile faltered. You talked to Bradford? I went to see him at his hotel. We discussed the situation. What did he say? He admitted that you two had developed an inappropriate relationship. He also said he was ending it. Valerie nodded quickly. That's right. We both realized we'd made a mistake. He seemed very concerned about your reputation. Said he didn't want you to suffer because of his poor judgment. That's good of him. I moved closer to her, close enough to see the fear in her eyes. Valerie, is there anything else you want to tell me? Anything you think I should know before this situation gets worse? She searched my face, trying to determine how much I knew, how much I was guessing, how much I was willing to forgive. No, she said finally. I've told you everything. Good, because tomorrow we're going to start fighting back. Fighting back? Against whoever's been stalking you and Bradford. Whoever's been violating your privacy and trying to destroy your lives. It's time to go on the offensive. Relief flooded her features. You believe me. I believe in us, in our marriage, in fighting for what's important. She kissed me then, with more passion than she'd shown in months. It was the kiss of a woman who thought she'd successfully manipulated her husband, who believed she'd convinced me to be her ally rather than her enemy. I kissed her back and began planning Phase 4. The next morning brought a development I hadn't anticipated. Valerie's phone rang at dawn with a call from her lawyer, who delivered news that sent her into a complete panic. They're conducting a formal investigation, she said after hanging up. Not just HR, the company's board of directors. They want to interview me under oath about my relationship with Bradford and my use of company resources. That seems excessive. It gets worse. Someone sent them additional evidence overnight. Financial records showing Bradford approved unusual expense reports for me. Hotel receipts, restaurant bills, even a weekend conference that apparently never existed. I poured coffee and tried to look concerned rather than satisfied. The financial evidence was something I'd discovered during my research but hadn't used yet. Someone else must have found the same information and decided to escalate the situation. Who would have access to those records? Anyone in accounting, HR, or upper management. But Rick, some of those expenses were legitimate. The hotel receipts were from actual business trips. And the others? She hesitated. Bradford sometimes covered personal expenses as a favor. Nothing major, just dinners and small things. Another lie. The expense reports I'd seen showed thousands of dollars in questionable charges over several months. Weekend getaways disguised as business trips, expensive dinners at romantic restaurants, even jewelry purchases labeled as client gifts. How much money are we talking about? I don't know exactly, maybe a few $1,000s over the past year. Try 15,000, I thought, but I kept that information to myself. Your lawyer thinks this is serious? She thinks I could face criminal charges if they decide to pursue it. Misuse of company funds, fraud, conspiracy with Bradford to embezzle money. That's ridiculous. You're not a criminal. Tell that to the prosecutors who might be reviewing this case. Her phone rang again. This time it was a number she didn't recognize, but she answered anyway. Hello? Mrs. Mason? This is Detective Sarah Chen with the Financial Crimes Unit. We'd like to schedule an interview with you regarding irregularities in expense reporting at Packaging Solutions. Valerie's face went white. I need to call my lawyer. That's your right. But Mrs. Mason, I want you to know that cooperation at this stage could be beneficial for you. The longer this investigation drags on, the more complicated it becomes for everyone involved. I understand. I'll have my attorney contact you. After she hung up, Valerie sat in stunned silence. The situation had escalated beyond workplace gossip and marital problems into potential criminal territory. The police are involved now, she said quietly. It's probably just routine. When companies report financial irregularities, law enforcement has to investigate. Bradford's going to blame everything on me. I know he will. He'll say I seduced him, manipulated him, convinced him to approve those expenses. Would he do that? He's a coward, Rick. When things get difficult, he looks for someone else to take the blame. I found it interesting that she was finally seeing Bradford clearly, now that their affair had collapsed into mutual recrimination and legal jeopardy. What are you going to do? Fight back. If Bradford wants to make me the scapegoat, I'll show them who really initiated this relationship. She went upstairs to call her lawyer while I processed this new development. The criminal investigation was an unexpected bonus, but it also complicated my plans. I needed to be careful not to appear too involved in the evidence gathering, especially now that law enforcement was paying attention. My phone buzzed with a text from Danny. "Saw the news about the investigation. Want me to back off the social media campaign?" I replied, "Continue, but be more careful. Focus on the workplace harassment angle." An hour later, Valerie came downstairs looking determined rather than panicked. She'd apparently had a productive conversation with her lawyer. "I'm going to cooperate with the investigation," she announced. "Tell them everything about Bradford's behavior, his abuse of power, his manipulation of company resources." Everything? Everything that matters. How he pursued me despite my initial reluctance. How he pressured me into a relationship I didn't want. How he used his position to coerce me into compromising situations. I stared at her in amazement. She was completely rewriting the history of their affair, transforming herself from willing participant to victim of workplace harassment. Is that what happened? It's what I remember happening. And the text messages that show you were an eager participant? Taken out of context. When your boss is pressuring you into a relationship, you say what you think he wants to hear. It's survival, not enthusiasm. The audacity was breathtaking. Faced with potential criminal charges, she was constructing an entirely new narrative that painted Bradford as the predator and herself as the victim. What about the expense reports? Bradford handled all of that. He told me the company was covering certain expenses as part of my compensation package. I never asked him to falsify anything. Do you have any proof of that? I have emails where he discusses expense policies and company benefits. My lawyer thinks they'll support my version of events. I nodded thoughtfully. So your strategy is to cooperate with the investigation and present yourself as Bradford's victim rather than his partner. That's exactly my strategy. What if Bradford tells a different story? Then it's his word against mine, and I have evidence of his pattern of inappropriate behavior with other female employees. Other employees? Bradford has a history, Rick. I'm not his first affair, just his most recent. My lawyer is already in contact with 2 other women who worked for him in previous positions. This was news to me. In all my research into Bradford's background, I hadn't uncovered evidence of other affairs. Either Valerie was lying, or she had access to information I'd missed. How do you know about these other women? Office gossip. Rumors that have been circulating for years. My lawyer is going to track them down and see if they're willing to testify about Bradford's behavior. That could be powerful testimony. It could also destroy his credibility completely. If the investigators believe he has a pattern of exploiting female subordinates, they'll be much more likely to accept my version of events. I had to admire her strategic thinking, even as I despised her dishonesty. Faced with the collapse of her career and potential criminal charges, she was mounting a sophisticated defense that shifted all blame to Bradford, while positioning herself as a victim of workplace harassment. "There's just one problem with your plan," I said. "What's that?" "The security footage. It's pretty clear that you were a willing participant in whatever happened between you and Bradford. Security footage can be misleading. Without audio, without context, it's just images that can be interpreted in different ways. Some of those images are pretty explicit, which is exactly why my lawyer is arguing that they represent a violation of privacy that should be excluded from any legal proceedings." She had an answer for everything. Every piece of evidence, every potential weakness in her story, every angle the investigators might pursue. It was like watching a master manipulator at work, constructing lies so sophisticated they almost sounded believable. "What do you need from me?" I asked. "Your support, your testimony about Bradford's inappropriate behavior at company events, your witness to the stress and anxiety I've been experiencing because of his harassment. You want me to lie for you? I want you to tell the truth about what you observed. Bradford's possessive behavior toward me, his inappropriate comments, his obvious interest in pursuing a relationship despite my married status." I thought back to the company holiday party where I'd met Bradford. Had his behavior been inappropriate? Had he shown excessive interest in Valerie? Looking back through the lens of what I now knew, I could probably construct a narrative that supported her version of events. "I'll do whatever I can to help," I said. Relief flooded her face. "Thank you. I know this is difficult for you, but I need you to understand that I never wanted any of this to happen." "I believe you." She kissed me gratefully and went upstairs to prepare for her meeting with the detective. While she was gone, I called Pete to update him on the latest developments. "She's throwing Bradford under the bus," I reported. "Smart move considering the circumstances. The question is whether it will work. If she can convince the investigators that she was Bradford's victim rather than his accomplice, she might avoid criminal charges." "How do you feel about that?" "Conflicted. Part of me wants to see her face consequences for what she did, but another part of me is impressed by her survival instincts." "What's your next move?" "I'm going to help her destroy Bradford." "Come again?" "Think about it, Pete. If Bradford goes down for workplace harassment and financial fraud, he's completely discredited. No one will believe his version of events. Valerie gets to play the victim, but she's still lost her job, her reputation, and her marriage." "You're still planning to divorce her?" "Eventually. But first, I want to see how this plays out. If she can successfully destroy Bradford while thinking I'm supporting her, that's a level of poetic justice I can appreciate." That afternoon, I did something that surprised even me. I called Bradford. "Rick? Why are you calling me?" "Because I think we need to talk about Valerie's new strategy." "What strategy?" "The one where she claims you harassed and coerced her into a relationship she didn't want." There was a long pause. "She's saying what?" "That you abused your position of power to pressure her into an affair. That you manipulated company resources to cover personal expenses without her knowledge. That you have a pattern of inappropriate behavior with female subordinates." "That's completely false. She pursued me as much as I pursued her." "I know that, you know that. But the investigators don't know that." "What are you getting at?" "I'm getting at the fact that Valerie is about to destroy your credibility completely, and you need to decide how you're going to respond." "Are you offering to help me?" "I'm offering to be realistic about the situation. Valerie has evidence, witnesses, and a compelling narrative. What do you have?" "The truth. The truth is that you both engaged in an affair that violated company policy and involved misuse of corporate resources. The question is, who gets blamed for initiating and orchestrating that affair?" "So what do you suggest?" "Cooperation. Full disclosure. Accept responsibility for your part in what happened, but make sure the investigators understand that Valerie was an equal participant." "Why would you help me hurt your wife?" "Because I want the truth to come out. All of it." After I hung up, I sat in my office contemplating the chess game I'd set in motion. Valerie thought I was supporting her victim narrative. Bradford thought I was helping him present a balanced account of their affair. In reality, I was manipulating both of them toward a confrontation that would expose the full extent of their deception and betrayal. That evening, Valerie returned from her meeting with Detective Chen, looking cautiously optimistic. "How did it go?" "Better than I expected." She seemed sympathetic to my situation and very interested in Bradford's history of inappropriate behavior. "What kind of questions did she ask?" "About the timeline of our relationship. About Bradford's management style and his treatment of female employees. About the expense reports and whether I understood how they were being processed." "And your answers?" "Honest. I told her that Bradford created a hostile work environment that made me feel pressured to accept his advances. I explained that I tried to maintain professional boundaries but felt my job security was threatened if I didn't cooperate with his expectations." "Did she believe you?" "I think so. She took extensive notes and asked for contact information for other employees who might have witnessed Bradford's behavior." "What happens next?" "They're going to interview Bradford tomorrow. Detective Chen warned me that he might try to blame me for everything, but she said that's typical in these cases." "Are you worried?" "Not anymore. My lawyer thinks we have a strong case for workplace harassment. Even if they can't prove criminal intent on Bradford's part, his career is finished." I nodded and put my arm around her. "I'm proud of you for standing up to him. Thank you for supporting me through this. I know it can't be easy having your wife's affair investigated by the police." "Alleged affair." She smiled at that. "Right. Alleged. We spent the evening like a normal married couple, watching television and discussing our plans for the weekend. But underneath the domestic tranquility, I could feel the tension building toward a climax that would shatter both their lives in ways they couldn't imagine. The next morning brought the news I'd been waiting for. Bradford's interview with Detective Chen had apparently gone very badly. According to Valerie's sources in the office, he'd been arrested on charges of financial fraud and abuse of power. They arrested him? I asked, feigning surprise. This morning, his lawyer couldn't prevent it. Apparently, the evidence against him was overwhelming. What evidence? The expense reports, the security footage, testimony from other employees about his inappropriate behavior. And Rick, they found evidence of other affairs, just like I suspected. Other affairs? 2 former employees came forward with stories about Bradford's harassment. One of them had documentation going back 3 years. I felt a moment of genuine surprise. Either Valerie had been more thorough in her research than I'd given her credit for, or Bradford's pattern of behavior was more extensive than I'd realized. So, your strategy worked. Perfectly. Bradford is facing criminal charges, his reputation is destroyed, and I'm being viewed as a victim rather than a co-conspirator. What about your job? Still suspended pending the investigation. But my lawyer thinks I have grounds for a wrongful termination lawsuit if they don't reinstate me. And us? Our marriage? She looked at me with what appeared to be genuine affection. Stronger than ever. You stood by me when I needed you most, Rick. I won't forget that. I smiled and kissed her forehead. That's what marriage is about, supporting each other through difficult times. But even as I said the words, I was planning the final phase of my revenge. Bradford's arrest was satisfying, but it wasn't enough. Valerie had successfully manipulated the situation to avoid consequences for her betrayal, and that couldn't stand. It was time for her to learn that actions have consequences, even when you think you've cleverly avoided them. 3 weeks after Bradford's arrest, Valerie seemed to believe she'd successfully navigated the crisis. The criminal investigation had cleared her of any wrongdoing, her lawyer was negotiating a settlement with Packaging Solutions, and the media attention had largely moved on to other scandals. She'd even started talking about our future together, making plans for a vacation and discussing the possibility of renewing our wedding vows as a symbol of our strengthened marriage. I've learned so much about myself through this experience, she said over dinner at our favorite restaurant. About what's really important, about the value of having a partner who stands by you no matter what. I'm glad something positive came out of such a difficult situation. Bradford's sentencing is next week. My lawyer thinks he'll get 2 years for the financial fraud charges. That seems appropriate. I almost feel sorry for him. His wife took half his assets in the divorce, his career is over, and now he's going to prison. All because he couldn't control his impulses. The irony was perfect. She genuinely believed that Bradford's downfall was entirely his own fault, that she bore no responsibility for the affair or its consequences. What about you? Any word on your job status? They're offering me a position with a different division. Same salary, better benefits, and a guarantee that this incident won't appear in my personnel file. That's generous. My lawyer was very persuasive about the hostile work environment claim. The company wants to avoid a lawsuit. I nodded and raised my wine glass. To new beginnings. To new beginnings. We clinked glasses, and I watched her smile, knowing it would be one of the last genuinely happy moments she'd experience for a very long time. The next morning, while Valerie was at her lawyer's office finalizing the employment settlement, I put the final phase of my plan into motion. It started with a phone call to Detective Chen. Detective, this is Rick Mason. I have some additional information about the Packaging Solutions case that I think you should see. What kind of information, Mr. Mason? Evidence that my wife wasn't entirely truthful during her interview. Evidence that shows she was an equal participant in the affair and the financial fraud. There was a pause. Are you sure you want to provide evidence against your wife? I'm sure I want the truth to come out. An hour later, I was sitting in Detective Chen's office with a laptop full of evidence I'd been holding in reserve. The security footage that showed Valerie initiating contact with Bradford. The text messages where she discussed manipulating company expense policies. The financial records proving she'd personally benefited from thousands of dollars in fraudulent charges. This paints a very different picture than what your wife described, Detective Chen said, after reviewing everything. I know. I've been struggling with whether to come forward, but I can't live with the deception anymore. Why didn't you share this information earlier? I wanted to believe her version of events. I wanted to think she was a victim rather than a co-conspirator, but the evidence is clear. Detective Chen studied the financial records carefully. These expense reports show your wife personally benefiting from company funds, weekend trips, expensive dinners, jewelry purchases. That's not consistent with someone being coerced into an unwilling relationship. No, it's not. And these text messages show her actively planning to manipulate the investigation. She's been playing both sides from the beginning, deceiving Bradford, deceiving me, deceiving your investigation. Mr. Mason, I have to ask, why are you doing this? Why are you providing evidence that will likely result in criminal charges against your wife? I looked out the window of her office at the city where I'd lived and worked for 15 years, where I'd built a life with a woman who'd betrayed everything we'd shared together. Because marriage is supposed to be based on trust, I said, and I can't trust someone who's capable of this level of deception. 2 days later, Valerie was arrested at our home. I watched from the kitchen window as Detective Chen and 2 uniformed officers walked her to a police car in handcuffs, while our neighbors gathered on their porches to witness the spectacle. She looked back at the house as they put her in the car, her eyes finding mine through the window. Even from that distance, I could see the shock and betrayal on her face. She'd finally realized that her supportive husband had been playing a deeper game than she'd imagined. The charges were extensive: conspiracy to commit fraud, misuse of corporate resources, perjury during the initial investigation, and obstruction of justice. Her lawyer, who'd been so confident about the wrongful termination lawsuit, now faced the challenge of defending a client who'd lied to everyone, including her own legal counsel. The media coverage was brutal. The story of the executive who'd successfully played the victim while concealing her own criminal behavior became a cautionary tale about corporate corruption and the dangers of believing convenient narratives. Pete found me at home that evening, sitting on my back porch with a beer and watching the sunset. "How do you feel?" he asked, settling into the chair beside me. "Tired." "Satisfied?" "Getting there." "Any regrets?" I considered the question while watching the sky fade from orange to purple. I regret that it came to this. I regret that 12 years of marriage ended with handcuffs and criminal charges. But you don't regret exposing the truth. No, I don't regret that. What's next? Divorce proceedings, selling the house, starting over? You could have just divorced her when you first found out about the affair. Saved yourself months of planning and manipulation. I could have, but then she would have gotten away with it. She would have spun some story about growing apart, about needing space, about the marriage running its course. She would have taken half our assets and moved on with Bradford or someone like him. Instead, she's facing 2 to 5 years in prison. Her career is destroyed, her reputation is ruined, and everyone knows exactly what kind of person she really is. Pete nodded slowly. That's some serious revenge, Rick. It's not revenge, it's consequences. What's the difference? Revenge is emotional, consequences are logical. The trial lasted 3 weeks. I testified about the evidence I'd discovered and my decision to come forward with the truth. Valerie's lawyer tried to paint me as a vindictive husband seeking revenge, but the financial records and text messages spoke for themselves. Bradford, serving his own sentence, was brought in to testify about their relationship. Faced with additional charges if he lied under oath, he confirmed that Valerie had been an equal participant in both the affair and the financial fraud. The jury deliberated for 6 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. Valerie was sentenced to 3 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 18 months. As the judge read the sentence, she looked at me one last time. Her expression was no longer shocked or betrayed. It was resigned, almost respectful. She'd finally understood that she'd been outplayed by someone she'd consistently underestimated. Outside the courthouse, reporters asked me how I felt about my wife's conviction. "I feel like justice has been served," I said. "Actions have consequences, and my wife is finally facing the consequences of her actions." "Do you plan to divorce her?" "Those proceedings are already underway." "Any final thoughts about this situation?" I looked up at the courthouse steps where Valerie had just been sentenced, thinking about the morning 3 months ago when I discovered her affair through frosted glass. "If you're going to betray someone's trust," I said. Make sure they're not smarter than you think they are. 6 months later, I was living in a downtown apartment, working the same job, drinking at Pete's bar on Friday nights. The house had sold quickly, and after legal fees and asset division, I'd walked away with enough money to start fresh. Valerie wrote me letters from prison, apologizing for her betrayal and asking if we could reconcile when she was released. I read each letter once, then filed them away without responding. Some people might call what I did cruel or excessive. They might argue that I should have simply confronted her about the affair and ended the marriage like a civilized adult. But those people have never watched their spouse betray everything they'd built together while calling them pathetically trusting. They've never seen someone they loved transform into someone they couldn't recognize. They've never learned that sometimes the only way to deal with a master manipulator is to become better at the game than they are. I kept one photo from our marriage, a picture from our wedding day, where we're both smiling and looking toward a future we thought we'd share. Sometimes I look at that photo and remember what it felt like to trust someone completely. Then I remember what it felt like to discover that trust was misplaced, and I'm reminded why I did what I did. Actions have consequences, always. Even when you think you're smart enough to avoid them. Especially then.